Most people throughout the African world have a real affection for Robert Mugabe. And this is because Mugabe has come to represent in our minds this lone figure in the African world, especially among so-called African heads of state who seem willing to stand up to white power. We look at our own presidents and prime ministers and leaderships, and we see how they continuously always sell out everything that we've got. And we see somebody like Mugabe stand up, and we make this comparison between Mugabe and these forces in our own countries, and we say, right on, Robert Mugabe. Every place Mugabe goes in the African world, he's saluted because he seems to be this individual who's willing to stand up to white power, where none of the other heads of state seem willing to do that. I think that we have to move beyond just the issue of Mugabe, however, because it's really, in the final analysis, not about Mugabe. Malema Luizi was addressing this somewhat when he talks about the historical struggle of our people for national liberation. Zimbabwe is not something that just happened. You remember, it's only recently, relatively recently, that we called this land base, this territory, Zimbabwe. Up until, most recently, up until the success of the national liberation struggle, it was called what? Rhodesia. And it was called Rhodesia, why? Because of the name of this white man, Cecil Rhodes, who controls so much of Africa, and who actually brought into this territory thousands of white mercenaries from England, who he rewarded for every African that they killed to take the land. They themselves, as individual white persons coming from England, were awarded a certain number of hectares of land for themselves. That's how the white people got the land in what we call Zimbabwe. I think it's really important for us to understand that it's not like one day the people in what we now call Zimbabwe woke up and said, hey, let's sell the land or give the land to white people. They came there with guns and cannon. In fact, in an afternoon, it was Rhodes who introduced the Maxim machine gun to southern Africa. And in an afternoon, they have recorded that they have killed as many as 5,000 Africans and then had tea. And then sat down and had tea after having done this. And it is because of our understanding of this reality, this history, that when somebody tells us that Mugabe is the boogeyman or the poster child for evil in southern Africa, we have some problems with that, right? Yes. Because we are aware of that history. Yes. And so, and that gives it some flavor, some of the reasons why we reject all of that nonsense. But the fact is that the situation in Zimbabwe, in Rhodesia, came about as a consequence of the struggle for national liberation. Our organization, the African People's Socialist Party USA, was the first organization in North America to create a ZANU support committee. And what needs to be understood, among other things, is that initially there were two primary organizations, national liberation organizations, if you will, in what was then called Rhodesia. One was the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, and the other was the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU. Now, one was supported by the Soviet Union, that is ZAPU, the then Soviet Union. The other was supported by China, ZANU. So the Soviet Union, in its ongoing contest with the United States and with Western imperialism, was always struggling for advantage, economic advantage. For example, the then Soviet Union had been isolated from the world economy by all of the other imperialist countries. And so it was always on the search for where it could find resources, because it didn't have the colonies, right, as France, United States, Germany, and all of them. It did not have these colonies, so it was on the search for where it could find resources in order to pump into the economy of the so-called Soviet Union itself. So you had them giving support to certain kinds of organizations inside Africa and other places as well, because this was a serious contest. They were being struggled. I don't know if people know it, but immediately after the Russian success of the Russian Revolution,